out for as you're presenting your poems and why certain poems will definitely score higher than others, right? First and foremost, you must follow instructions. When we are coming up with these tasks, we are looking for particular things, right? When I tell you that the poem is supposed to be conversational, I expect you to use rhetoric devices to achieve that conversational nature of the poem. You get me? You do not then present an entirely flat poem that does not reflect any nature of conversation, right? Because it was an instruction that let this be a conversational piece of spoken word. You hear me? That's the first thing. Second thing, we look for originality and creativity. One thing, first and foremost, the creativity must be going towards enhancing the poem, enhancing the message and the theme that is in the poem, right? So even when you're creative, but that creativity does not enhance the poem, I will not credit it. So you must understand what the poem actually wants, what are the requirements of this task in regards to the poem that I am going to give. And that is by a core aspect, the relevance to the theme. If the poem expects you to, now like for example, the poem we've just finished was not just about, the poem that they have just presented, was not just about the tricks that fraudsters use. Beyond those tricks, you're supposed to tell us how we resolve, how do we survive these tricks, right? That is now the completeness of the theme, right? So as brilliant a poem as it could be, if it does not completely achieve the entirety of the theme, I will not score it as highly as someone who was equally brilliant, but they went throughout the entire theme. So one thing, and this goes to all the speech tracks, understand the requirements of the task before you start preparing. As we head into the finals, understand what this task is asking you for. Because, you see, I set these tasks, but even before any round, I first go through the task. Before I listen to the first poem, before I listen to the first story, before I listen to the first speech, I first go through a task that I had set myself. Why? I need to remind myself what are the requirements that I was thinking about when I was setting this task. So, when you read these tasks, make sure, for crying out loud, you understand these requirements. Because most of a final, it can be the difference between first place and second place. That you missed out one particular idea that was required in that poem, and that's the reason why another poet has ranked ahead of you. Even because, I'm going to be sincere with you, the people that will make it to finals, you will all be equally good, right? Because beyond, I had wanted to take half, right? But because I find that more than half have an average of above 70, I chose to take the next person because they equally did a good job, right? So the fact is, all the people that have reached finals are good. So the expectation then is, how well do you understand your piece that it achieves all the possible requirements that that task was asking for? And I'm telling you, that's why I'm making this briefing before finals, because it's a very thin line. You can think, by the way, and I'm going to tell you, I was doing a pitch competition. Before Trump took away his money, there was a program that the American government was funding, Young African Leaders Initiative. It was hosted by the regional, Young East Africa Regional Leadership Center. It's at Jomo Kenyatta University in Nairobi. So we went there. Part of the things that we needed to do for graduation was present speeches like pitching competition. It was a pitching competition. And as part of the people, it was the only competition. Okay, so there were multiple things, but I won the pitching competition. And you know the product that I was pitching? Soya porridge. Okay, like porridge, soya porridge, but we're just modifying it to mothers, children, pregnant women, like that was the whole concept. It was so simple, and yet there was someone who was pitching a traffic light, there was someone who was pitching an irrigation system that's powered by solar. People had brilliant ideas, but I won with the basic idea. Why? I understood all the requirements that people were, that the judges were looking for. These people had so grand ideas, they failed to explain them the way the judges wanted them. That's why I'm making these explanations now, this bit of explanation now. Understand the requirements of that speech, understand the requirements of that story or that poem before you begin the final. Because the people you're competing with are as good as you are. So that means the one who understands the task most and executes it in the best way possible gets to win. Right? Next thing on poetry, we evaluate artistic merit. Right? Again, like I said, everything that I'm talking about, it must be in regards to in regards to fulfillment of the theme, right? Because the theme of the speech is executing the task. So if you're not fulfilling the theme, you've not executed the task. It doesn't matter how brilliant your poem is. You get me? Right? So these other things are supposed to add weight to you executing how relevant was this particular piece to the theme. Do you use proper rhetorical devices? There's someone who used contrast very beautifully in round one, and I was so impressed, right? Contrast is a very beautiful tool of poetry, right? Emphasis, repetition for emphasis. The idea is, how do you use these things well enough that they advance the value of your poem? Those are things that we'll be looking out for. Again, it's important then, now I'm going to, more often than not when I'm training, this is the last part that I talk about when it comes to poetry. The emotional impact of your poem. Now this is something that is very important. There's a difference between you crying and then you making me cry. You get me? There's a huge difference between you crying and you making me cry. The idea is, I'm now turning it broad to the emotion, right? There's a difference between you being emotional and evoking emotion in your audience. Now what we reward is evoking emotion, not you being emotional. There's a thin line, but you need to err on the right side of that line. You need to evoke emotion. Me, I do not care about you being emotional. For as long as your poem does not make me emotional, your being emotional does not help. You get me? So, those are things that I am looking out for as I'm listening to pieces. But guys, understand what the poem is asking of you. What the task is asking of you. Because if you cannot execute the task, what are you doing? Any questions before I announce?